three lobes are present in lungs. So, now you can see the three lobes present in that right lung. This is right lung. This is left lung. So here, this lobe of left lung, upper lobe of left lung is left superior lobe, left inferior lobe, right superior, right middle, and right inferior lobe. So like this, lobes are present. And this notch is called as cardiac notch. Cardiac notch. So now, bilayered membrane, two-layered membrane will cover these lungs. That is just like this. That is called as pleura. Pleura. Two layers will be there. Like this. So this two-layered membrane is called as pleura. In the two layers, the outer layer is called as parietal pleura. Parietal pleura. The inner layer is called as visceral pleura. Combinedly, we call it as pleural membrane. So what are the two layers present in pleural membrane? One is parietal, another one is visceral. Not only here, anywhere, if the word parietal comes in biology, that is outer. Visceral is inner. So, that's why the internal organs are also called as viscera or visceral organs, internal. So parietal and visceral, two pleural layers will form pleural membrane. In between the two pleural layers, space is present. That space is called as pleural cavity. Pleural cavity. It is filled with fluid. That is filled with fluid. We can find one fluid here. That is called as pleural fluid. Pleural fluid. In laboratory, if you take slides, two blank slides, glass slides, if you dip them in the water, if you make that slides wet, after making the slides wet, if you bring that means the water membrane, the water layer which is present on the slide will make the two slides to attach. In the same way, the fluid which is present in between the two pleural layers will bind the two layers very strongly. And one more thing, these lungs will constrict and expand. Continuously in the breathing process, the lungs will change their dimensions. At that time, there should be no friction between the two layers. That's why the fluid will prevent the friction. So, if that fluid is present around the lungs can be suspended very freely and the lungs can show movements freely without having any friction with ribs also. So, in the thoracic cavity, skeletal structures are present. If the lungs expand at the time of inspiration, at that time the lungs may collide with ribs. So this pleural fluid will prevent that type of collision or friction with the two layers or with the skeletal structures. I repeat once again, the pleural fluid which is present in pleural cavity in between the two layers of pleural membrane that will prevent friction because the lungs will show the movements frequently. Okay, right. So now I told you yesterday in left lung only two lobes are present. That's why the left primary bronchus will divide into two secondary bronchi, whereas the right primary bronchus will divide into three secondary bronchi. So the secondary bronchi number depends upon the lobes of the lungs. Now, in this lung, we can find small units called as alveoli. Each alveolar sac, yesterday when I explained the respiratory tree, at that time I told you bronchi will be divided into bronchioles. From the bronchioles, finally alveolar duct will arise. So that is the last branch. That is the last smallest tiny branches present to respiratory tree. So if this is alveolar duct, this alveolar duct opens into alveolar sac. So this is one alveolus, this is one alveolus, this is one alveolus. So like this, a bunch of group of alveoli will form one sac. In this, more than 3 or 2 alveoli will be there. It may be 5, it may be 6, or it may be 4. So this is called as alveolar sac. In each alveolar sac, we find these chambers which are lined by simple squamous epithelium. So that's why very thin layer of cells will be there. That is the reason why the exchange of gases takes place very easily. So here, each alveolus is considered as the unit of lung. Each lung will be having approximately 100 millions of alveoli. Okay, so each lung will be having how many alveoli? 100 millions of alveoli. Right? So this is the structure of lung. Now, if you try to recall yesterday's point, this length of left primary bronchus will be more. The length of right primary bronchus is short. Okay, that's why this right lung is more susceptible to diseases, infections. Right. Now, let us see mechanism of respiration. Mechanism of respiration. Now, the first phase is breathing. I told you in 5 phases we can study respiration, breathing. What is another term for that breathing? Ventilation. Ventilation. This breathing happens in 2 stages. One is inhalation. Another one is exhalation. The common words are inspiration, expiration. In our body, we can observe the 2 types of movements of air. In the process of inspiration or inhalation, the atmospheric air will be taken up to lungs. So for that inward movement of air, we have to create low pressure inside the lungs. If the pressure inside the lungs are lesser than atmospheric pressure, then the movement of air takes place from the atmosphere into lungs. For that purpose, two factors will help in these two types of movements, inspiration and expiration. So there are two factors which will influence breathing. Number one, first factor is pressure, because this is nothing but movement of air. That movement of air depends on pressure, differences in the pressure. Number two, muscles. You know very well, in our body, the movements of organs are brought by contraction of muscles. Muscular contractions will lead to movements of the body or body parts. So these two are the main factors which will help in breathing process. Now, if you start thinking about the pressure, that pressure is related to air only. That air pressure we can see in three different areas differently. Number one, atmosphere, atmospheric pressure. Number one means whatever the pressure present in the air, in the atmospheric air, that is atmospheric pressure. Number two, what will be the pressure inside the lungs? Because always the comparison is important. So, if the air wants to enter into the lungs, when the atmospheric air will reach the lungs, in the lungs there should be low pressure. Then only the air can move. Otherwise, if atmospheric pressure is lower than the pressure inside the lungs, the air will start moving out. So that depends on inspiration and expiration. That's why we have to concentrate on the air pressure inside the lung. So inside, that is intra. So within the lungs, pulmonary pressure. So this is the second area where we have to think about pressure, where inside the lungs. Whatever the air pressure present inside the lungs called as intrapulmonary pressure. Number three. Now I told you pleural layers, visceral and parietal pleura. Within that pleural layers, inside the pleural cavity, pressure will be there. That is intrapleural pressure. Before starting that mechanism of breathing, I will tell you one important note. Thing is, whenever the thoracic cavity, where the lungs are present, in the thoracic cavity. So in the thoracic cavity, whatever the dimensions, it may be dorsoventral dimension or anterior-posterior dimension. If the dimension of the thoracic cavity is increased, the pressure inside the thorax will decrease. Remember, think, if the thoracic cavity becomes bigger, the pressure inside the thoracic cavity will decrease. At that time, this thoracic cavity will try to pull that visceral pleura away from the lungs. I told you just now, the parietal and visceral pleural layers are bound very strongly. So whenever the thoracic cavity is pulling that outer pleural layer, immediately that will start pulling that internal pleural layer also. So both these two will start moving towards the thoracic wall of the body. So at that time, this pleura will try to pull that lungs. So the lungs will expand. So what you understood, for the expansion of the lungs, thoracic cavity must expand initially. So if the thoracic cavity is expanded, lungs can expand. That depends upon the intrapleural pressure. If the intrapleural pressure is negative, then lungs have scope for expansion. Because surrounding the lungs, if the pressure is low, at that time the lungs will start expanding, moving towards the peripheral. The wall of the lungs will start moving towards peripheral. At that time, lungs become bigger in size. Okay, you understood? So, always, when we compare the intrapulmonary pressure, the intrapleural pressure will be negative. Intrapleural pressure will be negative. Okay? And what type of air we are taking, from where we are taking air up to the lungs? From the atmosphere. So, we can find atmospheric pressure and intrapulmonary pressure same. Okay? So, the pressure in the external atmosphere, the pressure in the lung will be equal. Because what quantity of oxygen is present in atmosphere? What quantity of CO2 is present in atmosphere? As it is, we are taking all that atmospheric air into lungs. So we can find when we are in resting condition, when we are relaxing, at that time the pressure inside the pulmonary, the lungs, the pressure outside the body will be same. Okay, so these two have the same pressure. If they have the same pressure, movement of air will not occur. No breathing. So that's why if the pressure here and here is same, if we create low pressure inside the lungs, at that time inspiration happens. If we create high pressure inside the lungs, at that time expiration happens. I don't know how much you are understanding, but one thing is, inspiration and expiration is all about the movement of air in and out from the lungs. If it is the case that movement of air depends upon the pressure inside the lung, that means intrapulmonary pressure. If the intrapulmonary pressure is lower than atmospheric pressure, inspiration takes place. If the intrapulmonary pressure is higher than atmospheric pressure, expiration takes place. But now that's why I am telling you, intrapulmonary pressure depends upon the size of the lung. If the lung is in one diameter, that will maintain the same pressure as atmospheric pressure. If the lung expands, the intrapulmonary pressure will fall. If the lung constricts, at that time intrapulmonary pressure will increase. So the movement of lungs will fluctuate, change the intrapulmonary pressure. Now what I am telling, the movement of lungs, expansion or constriction, depends upon the thoracic cavity dimensions. Because lungs are present inside the thoracic cavity, which is airtight cavity. Okay, right. So that's why here muscles will also help. So totally how many types of pressures we have to know? 3. Atmospheric pressure, intrapulmonary pressure and intrapleural pressure. Which is negative pressure in the 3? Intrapleural. Why? I told you the reason. If the intrapleural pressure is negative, then only there is chance for expansion for lungs. Otherwise, lungs cannot expand. Okay? Right. Now come to muscles. Now, I said the dimensions of the thoracic cavity will decide the size of the lung. Dimensions of the thoracic cavity will change depending upon the muscular contractions. There are 2 types of muscles. Pressures are 3, muscles are 2. Muscles. Number 1, the muscle present in diaphragm. In this diaphragm, we can find one muscle. You may think, how this muscle of diaphragm helps in inspiration and expiration. This muscle If it contracts, the muscle will move towards abdomen. Because I will tell you in detail, the muscle present in diaphragm is called as phrenic muscle. Phrenic muscle. This is also called as radial muscle. Radial muscle. So that is the first muscle. And the lateral sides of the chest cavity is covered by ribs. The ribs, if you imagine, this is one rib, this is another rib. In between the ribs, we find muscles. In between the ribs, we can find muscles. Ribs are commonly called as costa. Ribs are commonly called as costa. The muscles present in between the ribs called as intercostal muscles. Intercostal muscles. Okay. So what is the meaning of inter? In between. What is the meaning of intra? Within. Okay. So intercostal muscles are present in between the ribs. Phrenic muscles are present in diaphragm. You understand? So this is very important concept, but you have to concentrate carefully. Then only you can understand this very easily. Our intention is to take atmospheric air into lungs, that means inspiration. For inspiration, how to create low pressure inside the lungs? How we can reduce intrapulmonary pressure? How we can reduce? By expanding the lungs. For expansion of lungs, expansion of thoracic cavity must happen. Then only lungs can expand. Now what we have to focus, how these muscles will help in expansion of thoracic cavity. If you understand that, immediately lungs will start expansion. You understand? So the thoracic cavity dimensions depend upon these two. Now, what is the shape of diaphragm? Dome shape. That is curvy. It is bending towards thoracic cavity. So, if you see the length of this muscle, if it is 10 centimeters or 20 centimeters in length, if that muscle contracts, what happens? If it is 20 centimeters, it may become 15 centimeters or 10 centimeters. So that means the membrane will become short if the muscles contract. If the muscle contracts, the length of the muscle fiber becomes short. That is a very common thing. So when the phrenic muscle contracts, what happens to this diaphragm? Diaphragm becomes short. Short means we can expect straight line. That became short. If you measure this dome-shaped diaphragm and straight-lined diaphragm, which will be more lengthy? Dome-shaped. So the straight line is shorter than this dome-shaped. So what happened now? Phrenic muscles contracted. It became straight. The diaphragm became straight. One thing you have to understand, the lower surface of the lungs are attached to diaphragm. Here I am showing gap virilla, there will be some muscles. So that's why the lower surface of this lungs and diaphragm is attached. Now if the diaphragm becomes straight, diaphragm is moving towards abdomen. Due to this shortening of diaphragm, due to this diaphragm becoming straight, the abdominal cavity will reduce. See, this space is related to abdomen, but this space is added to thorax now. So due to movement of diaphragm towards abdomen. Okay, so which muscles contracted now? Phrenic muscles. So phrenic muscles contracted. Due to that, dome-shaped diaphragm became straight. So For that, due to that change of the shape of diaphragm, thoracic cavity became bigger, abdominal cavity became smaller. You understand? So, where if the diaphragm is moving down towards abdomen, this extra space is added to thorax. What happened to the thoracic cavity now? Anterior-posterior dimension of the thoracic cavity is increased. When the diaphragm is moving down, that is bringing the lungs also. So lungs become more lengthy when the diaphragm becomes straight. Okay, this extra space is added. So due to that, thoracic cavity became big. Not in all dimensions, only in anterior-posterior dimension. What happened to this diaphragm? This dimension, no change. Okay, right. Now, you remember that. Now, second muscle, intercostal muscle. Ribs, where these intercostal muscles are present? In between the ribs. If you imagine, these two are the ribs. See, if these two are the ribs, you can understand muscle is present in between the ribs. Some muscles are attached to outer surface, some muscles are attached to inner surface of the ribs. We have 12 pairs of ribs in thoracic cavity. In the rib cage, we can find 24 ribs. So in between the ribs, muscles are attached. Okay? If the intercostal muscle is present outer surface to the ribs, external. If the muscle is attached to the inner surface of the ribs, internal. So what you understood? Intercostal muscles are of two types again, internal and external. Internal and external. Internal intercostal muscle, external intercostal muscle. Right? Now, in our body, ribs are present. If the external intercostal muscles contract, listen, if the external intercostal muscles contract to pull the ribs forward. So, when the muscles are attached to the outer surface of the ribs, when that muscles contract, that muscles will start pulling the ribs forward. Means the ribs are present like this, they will start moving front. At that time, dorso-ventral dimension will increase. My chest cavity, from back to front, what is the dimension? If the ribs are moving forward, the dimension will increase. Dorso-ventral dimension of chest cavity. So that happens due to contraction of what? External intercostal muscle. External intercostal muscles, contraction will lead to pulling of ribs forward. If I start pulling the door with my hand, door will be closed from outside. Just like that, this external intercostal muscles will contract during inspiration. Inspiration means what should happen to the thoracic cavity? Dimensions must increase. So, this external intercostal muscle will contract. At the same time, what must happen to the internal intercostal muscle? They must relax. If outer surface and inner surface, both the surfaces, they have pulling force, ribs will break. That's why external intercostal muscle will contract. At the same time, internal intercostal muscle must relax. So these two types of intercostal muscles are opposite to each other in their functioning. If one is relaxing, another one will contract. Okay? Right. So due to this, movement of or contraction of intercostal muscles, dorsoventral dimensions are increased. Due to contraction of phrenic muscles, what happened here? Phrenic muscles contract. That becomes straight. I explained phrenic muscles. Okay, phrenic muscle and external intercostal muscle will be same in condition. If the phrenic muscle is contracting, external intercostal muscle will also contract. At that time, only one muscle will relax, which is that internal intercostal muscle. Okay, right. So due to, I'm concluding that due to contraction of phrenic muscles of diaphragm and external intercostal muscles present to the outer surface of ribs, the anterior posterior dimension and dorsoventral dimension both are increased. Due to that, complete chest cavity became larger, bigger. At that time, lungs will start expansion. If the lungs start expansion, in the lungs, the intrapulmonary pressure will become negative. But atmospheric pressure is same. But intrapulmonary pressure is reduced. Low pressure is created inside the lungs. Okay. Now what happens? That atmospheric pressure will start, that atmospheric air will start moving into the lungs. This is called as what? Inhalation. Okay, this inhalation, that's why when we inhale air, at that time, chest cavity will expand. We can see the breathing movements of any animal. If the animal is lying, for example, a dog is lying on the street, that dog will show breathing movements. Thoracic cavity will expand and constrict. That is due to phrenic muscles and intercostal muscles. Okay, at that time, when the thoracic cavity expands, we take the air in. So, muscles are contracting here. That's why this inhalation requires some energy. So, we call that inhalation as active process. Active process. You have to apply some force to pull the atmospheric air into the lungs. We have to breathe in. Passively, air will not enter. We have to take that air into the lungs actively. Okay? Right. Now, what about exhalation? Exhalation means expelling off, outward movement of air from the lungs. So, what we have to create inside the lungs? High pressure. To create high pressure inside the lungs, lungs must constrict. The constriction of lungs depending upon the thoracic dimensions again. If the thoracic cavity becomes smaller, at that time the pressure will fall on the lungs, lungs will constrict. Immediately the pressure will raise. Due to that high pressure, the air will move out. So how the thoracic cavity will be constricted? That is due to contraction of opposite to each this internal intercostal muscle. If the internal intercostal muscle contracts, that muscles will pull the ribs inward. If the muscles are pulling the inwards, at that time, what happens? Dorso-ventral dimension will reduce. Okay, inward movement of ribs are brought by the contraction of which muscles? Internal intercostal muscle. So, contraction. At that time, external intercostal muscles must relax. So, they will relax. Now, what about the phrenic muscles? That will relax. Okay, if this phrenic muscle, if the diaphragm is straight, if that muscle relaxes, it becomes more lengthy, it becomes down. So it will move up. If the diaphragm is moving towards thoracic cavity, the anterior posterior dimension will reduce, decrease. Okay, so see the first movement, contraction, relax, contraction. This is related to inspiration. The second movement is related to expiration. So during expiration, only one muscle will contract. During expiration, only one muscle, that is internal intercostal muscle. During inspiration, two muscles will contract, that is external intercostal muscle and phrenic muscle of diaphragm. Okay, so you can understand. If you understand inspiration process, expiration you can understand easily. Now, what about expiration? Is it active process or a passive process? Without any additional force, the air will be expelled out. If you sit calmly in the chair, the air will come out. That is passive process. So which is passive process, which is active process? Inspiration is active process, expiration is, expel the air forcefully. Take a long breath, breathe out at the maximum level. At that time, we will try to push that air out forcefully. That means forceful expiration will become active. Normal expiration is passive. Forceful expiration is active. You understood? Forceful expiration is active. Okay? Normal, in the normal condition, whatever we are doing during expiration, that is passive only. But intentionally throwing that air completely out from the lungs, that is active. Okay, right. So these are the changes which happen in both inspiration and expiration. So you have to understand what are the three types of pressures which are playing role. What are the two types of pressures? Now in deep, if you see three muscles are there. One is phrenic muscle, internal intercostal muscle, external intercostal muscle. So you can understand that completely. Okay, this is breathing process. So in this breathing, what happened finally? Oxygen entered into lungs. Now in external respiration, second phase, how the exchange of gases takes place between the alveolus and blood, that will take. We can understand that tomorrow. Okay, thank you. If you have any doubts, ask me.